cool. So you have like layers.
The back, yeah.
It is a big deal because we're not Berlin or New York or Vancouver. We're not Montreal by any means. Like, we're not London. We're tiny, you know? We're like this tiny little community that's, up until the last couple of years, has been called really anti-cultural, you know, like oil and gas. And we are those things. We have to acknowledge that we're pretend cowboy culture. That's us too. Not that I love that, but there are parts of that that I kind of think are pretty awesome. But then there's this other thing that happens here where people are really good at making opportunities for themselves.
And I'll see that a lot in art is, you know, you'll go to a show and it'll be highly conceptual, and then someone will have this really lengthy didactic about like, well, here's actually all the conceptual basis behind my work. And then, you know, that is cased generally in this international art English, which doesn't really make sense to lay people at all. And they use things like, well, you know, my art explores the narratives of, you know, well, so it's, I guess there's a point where you leave knowledge behind and understanding behind, and you just kind of, you just see something and you just let it, you just experience it.
I got the feeling that people were relieved. They were relieved that they lived in a city that they have been told for so long is devoid of culture, and is all about making money. To have an event like this, it's like, oh, thank God our city's cool. You know, there is that sort of element.
Rec City is essentially 9 houses scheduled for demolition in Sunnyside, Calgary, that we have been given license to take over. And by we, I mean a whole group of over 100 artists, and transform into an art space, a music venue, and installation space, basically.
People are seeing these houses in a whole new way. They're being featured so strongly by the very fact that they're going to be destroyed. They have this second life to them. And I see it as almost like a lifespan. If a house could be like a human body with its own lifespan and sentience, it's as if the consciousness of this neighborhood or this strip of houses, each house is about to die, about to be torn down. And this whole Rec City project, the way artists are turning it inside out, it's as if the unconscious of the house is taking it over, and it's the whole delirium before death.
Everything started with Brandon and Sean. So Brandon and Sean were original co-founders of 809 Gallery, which is one of Calgary's first ever garage-based gallery spaces. And it kind of changed the face of how people thought about viewing art and showing art in Calgary.
Well, we went to Chicago on a class trip, and we walked around and
had a lot of fun. And then we found a couple places there that were like alternative spaces that sort of exist in these like kitchens and garages
and they seemed way more exciting than your traditional gallery because it was stuff you would never usually see.
At the time, about to graduate, the sort of fear of kind of just fading.
Yeah, just stopping.
Yeah, just stopping
the
kind
process of making art and showing art.
That got pretty daunting, so I thought this would be more of a place to keep that sort of art school bubble a little bit.
And Brandon Dahmer had this space because of his living situation.
So we all pitched $20 and bought some paint, and
a lot of it was donated.
It was all donated.
Spaces like 809 or Hate Gallery are often the first spaces that art students go to show their work. They're the space that transitions them into what is considered mythically the professional art path. But they're also a place where people realize, I think, how exactly they think as an artist.
I think if it wasn't for private spaces showing art, I probably wouldn't be an artist at all anymore. I probably would have lost interest by now because of, the stuff you have to show.
I wouldn't say we were the first of its kind, but we were very, we were in a nice location. It was accessible by train. We had a lot of people come through here over the years.
These spaces or alternative spaces tend to show work that from recent graduates or artists that are starting their career. So you see a lot of fresh ideas quickly.
But we also have shown really established artists too. And
they've shown, the stuff that they've shown has been weird stuff that they couldn't show elsewhere.
We just showed that we could just put our heads together and do it, and just like have something for us, like we didn't really have to bother to show anywhere else. We really wanted to showcase the people that we felt were like totally super rad talented. Everyone really had a great time here, and it was a very special place. And I'm gonna miss it like crazy.
Sean became privy to the knowledge that 809 and all the surrounding houses on the same block were being bought up one by one and were scheduled for demolition.
It took me a while to actually get a hold of the developers, but it basically was a couple of emails.
They approached us with this incredible idea. I said, look, we've got these 12 lots. We want to do an art display there. We said, that's fantastic. Well, what does that mean? And we were worried about public safety. We were worried about the houses were full of asbestos and mold. We were worried about remediating them, providing power, water, et cetera. How is it going to work?
Originally thought it would just be 809 being like this.
Yeah.
But then, we got 9, we had 11 houses, so it's like, probably need someone to help us out with that.
They decided that it might be kind of a cool idea to do something to eulogize 809 properly. And so they were thinking about the Arbor Lake School Collective and also the House Project, which is something I curated in 2011. And so they called me and they called John Frost, one of the founders of the Arbor Lake School.
We were very aware of what all the other curators have done. They're our friends. They're our friends, and we're, with the Arbor Lake School, that was a huge inspiration for me for a long time.
We're still trying to figure out what the Arbor Lake School was and is, but it formed nearly 10 years ago now. A bunch of people were kind of living in this house together and interacting with each other, and we were all artists, and we sort of found that that was a really good way to combat the after-school blues, the issue that a lot of artists have when they're not making art for the first year out of school. Let me put it this way, I haven't lived in that house for 2 years, and I'm still going to court over it. Some of the neighbors were really appreciative. Some of the neighbors thought that we were kooky artists, but that we deserved to do whatever we want, and they were excited by our energy. And other neighbors just absolutely couldn't stand us. When we did our first major project, we dug trenches in our front and backyard of our corner property, and with no fence, and reenacted World War I for 24 hours. The neighbors actually called the cops. We're dressed in kind of an insane person's idea of a clown army suit. And the police officer says, "Is this your house?" And I say, "Yes."
And he says, "Can you prove it?" And I say, "Yeah." And we just show him some mail, and he says, "Okay, well, if this is your house, I'm gonna leave. I can't tell you not to dig trenches and throw water bones at each other." When the police officer said that, we realized that we actually could use the house as our stage, and that was a really great mode of experimentation for us. And when you're a young artist with not a lot of money, having a giant house in the suburbs that can be your studio and your living quarters and your exhibition space and your sort of think tank for cheap rent, there's nothing better. One thing we did a little later with the Epilogue School was this thing called the Leona Drive project. We're going to tear off the fascia of a house and build a freakish homage to that house in the form of a shanty town, both an homage and a mockery of suburban lifestyle.
While I was living there, I got to do a cool project with them called the Leona Drive Project, which was in Toronto. And it was 4 houses scheduled for demolition on Leona Drive. They had been empty for like 40 years and squatted in, and were just really fascinating spaces. And we got to rip apart this house and just build things out of the parts. It was just the coolest project, like to work with a house, you know? And so I was commissioned a couple years after that to do a project for a couple that had just gotten married. What they initially asked me to do was an installation on the front lawn of a house that this couple would, in theory, be moving into. It turned out that this house was scheduled for demolition. The couple would never actually move in. They would just demolish it and then, you know, build a new house and move into that.
It was an old house, and it wasn't the kind of house that was old and worth saving. It was the kind of house that was old and worth tearing down. So he knew about our past work, and he contacted Caitlin.
There were 8 of us in the end that participated in the house project.
Some people did performances. I made sort of like a crystalline structure inside out of OSB and plywood with my brother that was kind of like house cancer.
They sold the property to John and Sarah, newlyweds, and now the house is coming down. 97 years it stood on this spot with lives and loves and deaths and blood. Soon there'll be a new house with new stories, with new people. But for now, there's us.
Caitlin's experience with the house project really helped us because I knew nothing about zoning laws. We knew enough to sort of prevent 100 people from breaking the law and getting us in trouble, but thousands, I had no idea.
I think all of us, including our pre-demolition experience, but also just experiences working for Giraffe Animation Festival and working as a PR person or a press person or knowing how to really write a grant or all of these things are experiences that have been brought to this project.
I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, I mean...
But I trust everyone, I think, is the biggest part. So I trust everyone involved, and I think everyone's super intelligent, and I don't think you can get a better team of people to
I do trust Calgary that they're not going to just come in and be
I mean, every city's got,
hooligans.
Well, a lot of things to consider.
Okay.
Because a couple people have been like, oh yeah, this is like Berlin, or this is like Montreal, or it's not like any of those things. It's like Calgary. It showcases so much of what Calgary is actually like if you can peel back the layer and get into what, the gooey sub-bits are doing.
A lot changed when we elected Mayor Nenshi, actually. It kind of made Calgary feel a lot more liberal in regards to the arts. And so I don't know that it couldn't have, but things are definitely a lot easier now.
It's not like the Museum of Modern Art. I remember walking through the MoMA. It's
definitely not like the Museum of Modern
Art. There's more to it than that. But I remember walking through the New York MoMA with Wayne's aunt.
And her just looking at me and being like, I feel like there's a joke and I don't get it. You know, I feel like this is so the opposite of that. Like these are houses, so they're really inviting spaces. Everyone's familiar with houses and how they work. You know, like the functionality of houses is no mystery. Whereas the functionality of a gallery space, it can be a little bit more vague just because it is so blank and changeable.
Daunting.
Yeah, and daunting, and it's very specific to art, whereas houses are very specific to inhabitation and domesticity and just everyday existence. And so we get to take a couple of those concepts and draw them into Rec City and draw them into an art showing experience where people feel welcome.
You never want to invite bylaw to an event, but bylaw always finds out about it. And as much as I don't like that, I also know that that's part of what makes legitimate change in any sort of space, is you influence the civic structure of your city, if you can. We want to be thoughtful to the neighbors because, like, really, they're part of this project. Like, this is their community. We are the alien intruders, you know? Yesterday, we had an interesting meeting with bylaw and police, and it was Andrew and I just talking to them. And there are some interesting rules in this world, right? Like, we have a performer working with hot dogs. He's doing a hot dog performance. And he, you know, in theory, shouldn't be giving away hot dogs without having, like, a business permit and, you know, like a kitchen license or whatever. Like, all of these rules that are in place that, I mean, Rec City's a little bit about challenging those rules themselves. Like, do they really need to exist?
Like, I've heard this kind of thing before. It's important to have that kind of disobedience streak. It's important to have that voice. The Arbor Lake School certainly has fans for that reason. I guess because I've just never thought of it that way, because I've never gone on my way making something to be disobedient. It just kind of sometimes happens. Some of my neighbors who were displeased with us asked to do mediated talks with us downtown. And I said, sure, you want to talk with a mediator, that's fine. We haven't done anything illegal, and you're not going to convince us not to make art. But here we are. And yeah, they were saying, you know, and that time that you grew the barley in your yard, it was just, it was lowering our property values, and we couldn't see around corners because your grass was 15 centimeters or higher, and we were worried about the fire hazard. And I said, you know, it's funny because I had to go to court over that and fight the city so that we could have barley over 15 centimeters in our yard. But guess what? The mayor, and this was Mayor Dave Roncagné, gave us an award for innovation in the arts for that specific project a year later. And when one arm of the city is saying, you know, good job, way to sort of like inject some vitality into the suburbs and be an artist and be cool and be a cultural worker in our city. And the other side is going, you can't even have grass on your yard.
You know, the graffiti stuff and the term graffiti has been a huge issue so far. Like, it's so public and stuff like that. And now it's in people's faces. Like, people who make graffiti illegally were in front of people. And I mean, the mayor was here, and there were people spray bombing, like, without permits or anything like that.
This project definitely runs in a gray area in a lot of the Calgary bylaws, if not completely against a few of them. So we rely a lot on the bylaw officers giving us leeway, understanding this project that is definitely for the community and has a lot of benefits to it that probably outweigh some of the small bylaw infractions.
So I wasn't here, but today we got a visit from a bylaw officer over this mural painted by McCallum Miller. There could be a $5,000 fine, but he also implied that the more press coverage we have, the less likely we are to be charged with anything. And so we have a new goal of scoring as much press coverage as possible.
We just had everything on the line. Kind of like, why are you going to make something shitty if it's just your money and your time going into it? Like, make something that you're super proud of. And then hopefully some people get to come and see it. And then when Friday night happened, and it was one of the greatest things I've ever seen in Calgary.
I had an opportunity to sort of stand back, sort of a block away, to be able to sort of get the whole block perspective. And there were literally, it looked like it was 1,000 people or thousands of people coming in and out of houses. There was lineups, there was music happening in the background, there was lights, it was just vibrating with art and art making and performance.
You just take a house, you give it to some artists, you say, you're in a space that is not a white cube, do whatever you want. There's something really exciting about that, something freeing about that for artists.
It's not one artwork that has just one goal. It's 100 artists. Through those 100 artists, there's some artists that want to discuss Rec City. There's some artists who just want to show their work. There's some artists that just want to have fun.
Because I got to be part of that process too, of like just deciding who should be part of this project, you know? And everyone was chosen for a very specific reason. And that was because these people are really part of Calgary's countercultural climate, basically, like landscape.
It was nice we took submissions, though. I'm really glad we did, because a lot of the stuff, you know, all the new people we met and people who don't even make art normally. Like, I called my house the counterculture experimentation house, and it was all just like gore, and it wasn't stuff you would see in a gallery whatsoever. And it was noise shows, and there were parents in there and moms and like, you know, kids walking through, and there was like doom noise music.
Doom noise.
I'm originally from Boston. That's where I went to school, and I think this experience is like very unique. I know like nothing like this has ever happened in Boston, and I don't know if it could. That like fluorescent paint, I really love those fluorescent colors, and especially they reflect so much UV light that in theory, if you looked at it for like a really long time, you would go blind, which I think is really like interesting to make something that's really like difficult to look at, but its only purpose is to be looked at.
Well, my original idea was to make like a haunted house or like some kind of spooky mansion thing. But then I started like thinking more into sort of what these houses kind of carry with them. So there's like a lot of memories and a lot of past experiences that are in the house. And I tried to find a lot of artists that would sort of activate that or purge it. Kind of airing out the house a little bit before destroying it.
The idea that I was thinking of was ways of making what's outside visible inside, and thought of using a camera obscura to do so. So there's just a small hole in an otherwise light-tight space that allows the light in, and the light from outside, whatever is being lit up outside, is projected through that hole and inverted onto the other side, like onto the wall. The theme of Brandon's house kind of ranged from like hauntings to like cult, but maybe why the camera obscura is kind of fitting is because it is what's happening outside, but it's inverted and kind of a bit shadowy. And it's a bit spooky because there's no technology making it happen. It's just a hole in the wall. And a lot of people couldn't understand how it was happening. So maybe that kind of occurrence that feels inexplicable can fit into the same feeling of like hauntedness.
I like it.
Anything stood out?
That's very unique. Oh, just how the houses are done up using material from the houses themselves. And you can see, you know, people's imagination expressed.
I like the non-instant messaging system.
Yes, yeah. Very innovative.
I wanted to look at women's relationships, their emotions, and their decorative or craft aesthetic. So for me, the idea of using the house as a character, as a domestic space, was really important. So I wanted to keep it functional. Over the course of the time that Rec City has been open, and even before it was open, I've used it for a number of sort of women-focused gatherings. So, you know, the bathroom works, the kitchen works. There's been cookies made here. There's been tea parties. I chose this house because it looked like the people that lived here really cared about it, and they actually did impose a certain aesthetic sense on the house. Like, this space has a feeling. It has people's experiences. You know, major life events might have happened in that in the space. So I didn't want to take that away in the way that I curated it. And I think people coming through the house can feel that. Like, one of the main things I hear from the audience when they come through this, oh, I like this house. I could live in this house. I wish I lived in this house. And I think that that's a really nice credit to give to the house before it gets knocked down. Like, if the house had a personality, it would be like, oh, people do love me.
I am making pillow tops, which are traditional Newfoundland, little-known traditional Newfoundland crafts that are basically weavings made completely from pom-poms. But no one really knows, like, where this type of weaving came from. Like, they do know that men did them in lumber camps. They kind of traveled from camp to camp, like in the middle of the woods in Newfoundland, and, like, you know, the boys would weave stuff from and then bring home their little pillow tops that were usually like this big and like an inch thick, an inch and a half thick of yarn, and give them to their sweethearts. So
would that not just melt your heart?
It's super cute. And then, so like, women did them sometimes, but it was mostly men that did them, which I find really fascinating.
The bouncing and climbing, just imagining myself as a child going through the same experience is the highlight, pretty much.
Kids have such a fascinating way of approaching artwork without any judgment, or they'll let you know right away whether something is cool or it's not cool, or if they're bored.
There were so many kids here on Saturday, and I like heard all this from different people, like children who were just like so stoked and like now want to build like these crazy houses, and I think it's a really good thing for everyone.
When Andrew saw Rec City and experienced it, because you really experienced it. You know, he went down the slide, he swung on a swing, he climbed on and up and over things. He was just full of stories to tell his family about these different rooms and these different experiences. Not just see something or look at something, but touch it, feel it, write on it, be part of it. That collaboration. Even at 8, he understood that that was something special. That's something that didn't happen all the time.
All the stairs out, and they're going to be like a floating walkway from that and from like, that little hole there to this archway.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's actually how you'll exit the house. You'll climb up a ladder and then take this walkway out.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
But it sounded so wild, like, and so huge, and something that the city would never okay. And I have to be honest, I didn't really foresee this happening, and then all of a sudden it was on. I run hate galleries, so I have I know a lot of local talent. so I kind of just picked some people I thought would do really wild pieces in here.
I started kind of keeping track of when someone would say, like, this doesn't matter, or like, that's insignificant. Every time something would come up like that, I would just sort of write it down. You know, like, that's the way when you open a door, like how you turn the doorknob left or right, doesn't matter. That's one of the things on there. And so that's where the inspiration for my project came from. The lights say a passing mood. And especially as a concept in art, it becomes really wishy-washy because there's a lot of things, of course, that don't matter. In fact, the list is enormous, right? But I guess specifically for Rec City, I thought that it made more sense because Rec City is about to be destroyed in a couple days. And that's kind of the future of insignificance, is that it matters for a little while to maybe a lot of people, but then it's gone. And there's really no way you can get that back.
Very unique, very one-off, very,
kind of like a snapshot in time for a lot of these artists. You know, it's kind of unfortunate in a way that it won't be here, but it's, you know, it's still part of a person's body of work and part of an art scene. Absolutely.
How does that affect you, knowing that this stuff is going to be destroyed pretty soon? How do you view the stuff that you're seeing with that knowledge?
Well, good and bad. I mean, I think we have to understand that a lot of art is temporary. Like, you know, when you think about music and dance and film and theater and that. And this type of, you know, physical art, installation work, and can be that way too. I don't think a lot of times we think of it that way, you know, because we're so used to seeing it in museum and gallery situations. Whereas this is more of a guerrilla setting, and that's part of it too. I think that it's cool that people are coming here because they know it's not going to be here again, you know. And for whatever reason, if that sparks people into checking out art and you know, having some emotion about it, that's the best part.
When you go to a gallery in Calgary and in most places, it's mostly the art community that's checking out the art. And I mean, that's normal. It's mostly car guys that check out cars. It's mostly knitters that read knitting magazines. But with these kind of affairs, it's so much broader scope. And so that really informed me curating my house, wanting to sort of make sure that we had things that were accessible to everybody. My original idea was to have almost set pieces from film, television, literary, you know, the demonically possessed nursery, the like perfect 1950s kitchen, these kind of like repeating archetypes in our sort of cultural understanding.
We did a sea thing with our cousins.
So this is called Big Fish, and it was made by the Bum family, which are a group of kids, or a collective of kids, and they really wanted to do the ocean. And they really thought about making stuff out of garbage, because the oceans are kind of clogged with garbage. And then amazingly, the other collective that's also in the basement, they had the same kind of concept. Right now we're fixing the fishing rod. They do a kind of performative element, which is like an old parlor game of fishing.
The ocean's full of garbage, and not a lot of people recognize that they're littering the garbage. So if we make the stuff out of garbage, then they'll say, oh, why is this room so full of garbage? But that's the reason, because we put the garbage in the ocean, so the garbage should show up here.
I used to sponsor this radio show that Kenna runs called The Morning After on CJSW. And so we sort of talked about scoring each room to make it a more immersive experience.
So my job really was to collect and amass various musicians and musical groups that would be interested in being a part of 807.
I guess I was saying that, like, it's, you know, like you have these moments on the road and you're just like, I'm too old for this. Like, I didn't get enough sleep last night, and it's taking me like 2 nights to catch up instead of being able to just go. And but you know, you come into town and then you have an experience like this Rec City experience where it transforms and rejuvenates you. And then there's this like octopus, and there's like holes in buildings and ladders and slides, and you have to get down on your knees, and then it reminds me of like that I am not old, and that like youth is, you know, in a sense eternal, and it makes me think I could, you know, keep doing this, keep traveling on.
I think we love the awe and wonder of like being a child almost. It's inspiring to laugh and to be joyful.
It's very joyful. The tone, the overall tone is very inspiring and playful.
Yeah.
Have you seen anything like this before?
No.
I'd say no, not like this.
Yeah. The scale is awesome.
I really wanted to curate 809 and like, this is my house, you know?
Yeah.
But then we just sort of were like, hey, let's like look at our group of artists and which house really fits best within them.
Yeah, no, I think Ryan did a great job with that. It's, that's the heart of this whole project, and I'm glad it was in the middle and it was that. So I think that was curated a lot better than what I could have done, or probably what Brandon could have done. Like,
I wanted to do a mural of like the people, the history of 809, just the energy that it had, and it always will have in memory. And these are illustrations, paintings, drawings of the founders and the supporters and just the friends of 809. This mural was organized by Yvonne Kustek, and she works for Prospect. Prospect is a facility here in town for adults with developmental disabilities to learn art, and she gave her class photographs of us, and just they got to choose who they wanted to draw, and this is how it kind of came together. And they came in here and painted it. Yeah, wanted to have the garage kind of just not anything new, but kind of like new, but with a twist, with a little bit of history. Just something like, I don't know. I've been very emotional through this whole process, so.
We're the Rec City Rec Center. So we've been running games here each night of Rec City. Foursquare and like puzzles and board games all the time, and then trying to do an extra game every night. We were really interested in the yards, and so we started talking about like playing in yards and having relay races and like how kids play through yards in like a neighborhood that's working. The first night we were having a lot of trouble. We were playing croquet, and everybody was looking at us like we were doing bad performance art, and we were super embarrassed. And then I wrote a sign that's in there that just says, "This is an actual rec center, we want you to play." And like the minute I wrote actual rec center, like somebody picked up the Foursquare ball and started playing behind me. And it was crazy that just like giving it a little bit more context and a little bit more permission to play made people do it almost immediately.
I mean, yeah, that's been a really interesting series of works here, and I think one I don't think it's an actual piece, but an inadvertent, but a nice effect of these works is the taking down of the fences between the yards, and so people can move laterally between these spaces. And just being here, you can I have a vantage point from that every night, and it's a really interesting opening that takes place, and I think people that are experiencing this are also getting that sensation of cutting through what would normally have been compartmentalized spaces, and that are now much more fluid. I think it's one of the things I'm most happy about with this whole project.
For the first time, well, in a long time, you actually see color on people's houses and in people's houses, and people aren't afraid to kind of do something weird. I think the unfortunate part is that the things that will probably be built aren't very different from what already exists in town. So I think it's nice to kind of have this like explosion of art that is beautiful and colorful and exciting and isn't the taupe of Calgary, for lack of a better term.
You could talk about the fact that we approached the development company, that it was us, and it wasn't their idea. And I think a lot of people have sort of assumed that Rec City was done through some organization. It was incredibly DIY, and it was supposed to be DIY. Like, it was all these DIY curators, and like in the way that 809 was just, a gang of folks that were just like, hey, this could be fun,
I put the tube slide in 823. It was actually really nice. I found a lot of the audience ended up, sort of becoming more childish or playful because of a piece like this, and sort of, getting a big smile on their face and connecting with the kid inside or something to that effect. That's maybe a little cheesy, but.
Oh, it's so good.
Homage to the greenhouse itself, I decided to kind of bring life to it. So I thought the best way to do that would be to to make a forest, make it seem like it's living in, a really playful environment. It was built by John Webster in around the 70s, right after Chernobyl. That sparked a drive in him to make and produce food for himself, to be able to grow all winter long. Yeah, he used to own a couple houses on this block, and I think he was really attached to this neighborhood right up until last year, because he said he was growing food in the greenhouse. So I got to know him by how he built things. When he built it out of scraps. So, to save money, he just kind of pieced it all together, and he made this greenhouse that's really an amazing structure, and it's something that might not be able to exist now, like with the city bylaws.
If bylaw had gone through these houses, they could have very easily found any number of things wrong, whether those things were safety related or like aesthetically displeasing to the community or things like that. Like that could have just closed us before we even had a chance to happen. I was always a little bit concerned about the development company because we signed a letter with them. They've been so supportive, really. In the end, they've been incredible. But there were points where I think I was pretty sure they didn't quite understand what we were going to do. There are a number of safety things that we were trying to make them feel better about because they are in our minds, and that's something that people sometimes assume about artists. There's sometimes this assumption that artists are not thinking about practical things because art is so, it's ethereal. It's not always practical.
It was quite a long dialogue. And we met 3 or 4 times to say, here's our boundaries. We want people to be safe. Here's your boundaries. They wanted full artistic expression rights. We said, okay, that's fine. We just said, please don't destroy us somehow in the media. And they said, yeah, we'll more or less be respectful. But it's different, right? I think it's too bad that people have that perception that developers are antagonistic to this type of thing. Everything has a life cycle. And this is one of those things coming to the end of its natural life and rejuvenation. We are developers. We are agents of change. And doing this type of event was a great way of capping one segment of their life and starting a new one. So we thought it was a great way of making a break.
In the front of my house in 819, there's a flag post with a white flag on it. And when I received that proposal, I was really excited about it because the white flag just symbolizes kind of surrender in a kind of peaceful way, but also it's acknowledging the fact that it's sad destruction. It's acknowledging the fact that it's kind of like the houses being like, yeah, we know we're old. We have to give way to a more dense kind of development. But we want people to think about it as well. We don't want just this development to go up. And I think that's maybe an important part to this project is if we weren't here, then there would have been no discussion. It would have the block would have been torn down. The whole apartment complex would have been built. And that would be that. And it would just be tons of the other city blocks where that happens.
Rec City is something that we struggle a bit with at Chi because we certainly do support the local arts community and we see ourselves fitting in with that nonprofit milieu and where we're all trying to build a better city together. What we struggle with is the actual destruction of some of these older heritage properties because once they're gone, they're gone. And my concern is that Rec City provides developers for a way of checking a box or making it okay to destroy these buildings because, hey, we're going to create this really cool piece of art around them, and then we'll demolish them. So everything's okay. I hope the artists realize that they're also participating in the destruction of low-income housing, affordable housing, and also in some cases spaces that they might be able to use as studio space as well. So there's a bit of irony at play there.
People also tried to hold that against us, like the gentrification of a community and being okay with, the destruction of a community. But we can't stop that. We're not a political body. I mean, it's happening anyhow. And a lot of people were, they're like, oh, you guys are working with the developers, working with the enemy. But honestly, we used them in a positive way to do something in a space that would have just been empty and broken into. I'm sadder than anyone. I love this neighborhood. Yeah. I love being able to go to Safeway. I love the train is right there. It's honestly like a utopia. It's a perfect place to live. It's dirty, and it's paradise. All these poor neighborhoods where artists are, and then rich people come in. it's not a new story. I mean, we're just going to move somewhere else and do something different. And I think that's
And then they're
awesome.
going to want to live there and
Yeah.
tear that down.
Yeah, so no, I think that's awesome. Like, I like to be ahead of the game.
I have mixed feelings. I have mixed feelings about this entire, from the top to the bottom, I have mixed feelings about this. When we checked out all these houses, you know, we're walking through completely habitable houses, really nice hardwood floors, beautiful clawfoot tubs, you know, like pretty sweet houses, definitely houses that are in a central location, that had affordable rent, and we're right beside a C-train station. Great places for, say, artists or anybody really to live in downtown. They're being torn down and big condo units being put up. Well, that's kind of shitty because a bunch of houses that a bunch of artists lived in are getting torn down. But I can't rail against it because it's increasing the density of a Beltline community that desperately needs more density if we want to have a vibrant downtown area. So I can't complain about Calgary's downtown not being vibrant and complain about houses being torn down in favor of condos. So that made it really exciting and interesting for me from the get-go because it was really touching on some issues that I'm engaged with.
Great to have that conversation that goes on about gentrification. I think what I'd like to see it a little bit more to the forefront because I'm not sure that the general Calgary audience gets that part of the conversation. So it would be great if we could highlight that piece a little bit more.
We had a comment from one of the Fast Forward articles that we were indirectly encouraging gentrification and that we were being used by the development company as a mode to basically earn forgiveness for something that's unforgivable, according to this one person who wrote in. And that was a really interesting thing to think about and discuss because, I mean, when comments like that are made, we as curators, I think, are just as interested in them as any positive comment, maybe more interested, actually.
Definitely. I've heard the criticisms that people think that developers are using us to sort of manufacture some consent or something. And I think that is a legitimate concern when you're talking about the gentrification of a neighborhood. And, you know, so it's not a black or white thing. Like, I think it's awesome and incredibly open-minded of them to say yes, and it was because we initiated that process. This is maybe a higher profile one, but it's not the only situation where artists have taken advantage of the fact that there's a space that is in some kind of limbo land, and they're occupying it for low rent, you know, and maybe somewhat unsafe conditions. So I think in a city where the landscape is changing so rapidly and so quickly, that there are very few affordable places to create artwork, that I think it's worth developing in the city, taking advantage of those times in the margins where things are kind of opened up to play around with it. But I also think there could be a breaking point there where it becomes a kind of an automatic thing. And I don't know if that's necessarily good either. I think what works well about this is that people weren't expecting it. That really changes the way they look at this neighborhood, puts this location on the map maybe in a way that it wasn't. I hope that discussion carries over into the residents of this condo. So they think about how it started and it's this kind of interesting lore that makes them actually feel obliged to be more culturally engaged.
We extensively photographed the entire Rec City, and it's our hope with permission from Rec City to put those photos all throughout in the public corridor spaces of the new project. Rec City sort of added to a little bit of the eclecticism of the building. We went from maybe our standard model to something with, like, we have now the live wall, different texture, different colors, and just a tip of the hat to the artistic foundations of the site. And I think it has more of an impact too on our company going forward. We start looking for more of these collaborations, these opportunities where we could work with, if it's not Rec City, but at least a similar artist group on future projects.
Some of the challenges we have to do with the huge development pressures in Calgary. They're massive. I actually come from Toronto, and there are big development pressures there too, but they're not as strong as they are here. So trying to get people to understand the value of heritage is also kind of tricky because Calgary is a pretty young city and a lot of people aren't familiar with the character of a city like, say, Old Quebec City, for example, or even in Winnipeg, there's some fabulous heritage buildings there. So one of our biggest challenges is just creating a baseline of understanding for the local population about the importance that our current heritage has to building a city.
I think we have a bit of a demolition addiction sometimes. And it's not bad necessarily, but it's something that we need to acknowledge, that there are potentials that we leave untapped because of the sort of interest in demolishing 100-year-old spaces. 100-year-old in specific because the city is only that old, really. So the spaces from the first round of Calgary are beginning to fall, and the new Calgary is emerging from that dust.
Because we have these temporary zones where things happen, we could get better at talking about the history of those spaces even after they're gone, and using that as a way to influence, I guess, the future of the use of that space.
Just the opportunity to talk about this or to kind of have a wake for this area is an important gesture.
Because Calgary is in such a, state of flux, and it's going through all these growing pains, and the result of it is all this deconstruction that's happening, and the developers, trying to change things and make them new, and there's a battle between people who want to see some kind of stability versus the people that want to see progress. So how can you find a balance? And I think that's just that's what we need to be starting to talk about.
I think the overall success and the ripple effect of this project is that sense of awe, that sense of wonder and creativity, curiosity that you could see on people's faces as they walked around the space, especially kids. I mean, they just come through here and hopefully they take something away that, a little more is possible than they might have thought.
It just turned out to be amazing. I never expected that. I totally thought it was just going to be, I don't know, I just thought it'd be much less than that. Because I said, we're demolishing this work. Who could put so much effort into something that's about to be destroyed? And they just, it's like someone tapped an underground reservoir. It just, out it came. It was great. It was really cool.
It's pretty amazing to start with nothing, like $1,000 from the Austin Foundation, and really prove that even with nothing, you can do a lot. A lot.
It was almost overwhelming that something so great came of so little, and then it was going to go away again. It was just, and it was so fast, and so many people, and so much energy. It was just, and it was the different flavors, the different textures, the different colors and sounds as I moved from each one. It was just, it was overwhelming. It was really, it gave us a shiver. We were really happy to do our little part for that.
I remember Brandon and Sean just being, the way that they would promote 809 was always so sort of here's a card, maybe you should come. And they'd be stoked if 60 people showed up, And that's most art projects probably is you're just excited if your friends come to see your work. And usually it's really insular and it's nice that way. You just get to high five all these people. But it's really, really nice if you can, I don't know. Real change happens when you include all the variables that you're scared of.
I do think of this as the very end of 809, so...
Finally.
Yeah, finally.
I'm glad it went down this way. I didn't think it would be this big.
Yeah.
I was hoping for maybe 2,000 people, but that was the first day.
It got pretty crazy.
It was insane.
It's not the end by any means, and I know other people are already doing this. There was a pre-demolition project in a house a month ago that some ACAD students threw together in 3 weeks, and it was really great actually. They did a pretty good job.
Leona Drive in Toronto, Heidelberg project in Detroit, and tons of one-off projects too. Holes through houses. Lots of people have done big projects, whether collaborative or with a single artist, recontextualizing architectural materials and settings.
But
but also like just realizing that these things do happen in galleries and garages, in garage galleries, and in, you know, like empty spaces in people's basements, in cupboards, in people's, like, this is totally Joseph Boyes in New York, but like in people's hats, like a gallery in a hat. Like you can do it anywhere. And that's really interesting to think about, I think, as someone who's they've never even thought of art outside of a gallery space. Like maybe public art and gallery art, but like what exists in the middle? Because that's a full spectrum. Like there's more too. Like it's everywhere. Like kids at ACAD right now, it's such a big thing to start your own gallery. And that's really awesome actually, because that means that you'll then have the skills that it takes to go on and have a space to show work, because you know that the spaces to show work, while they're limited, you can make your own, you can make more, you can build those possibilities for yourself.
This is not necessarily a truly unique project. It's its own spin on it and its own group of artists, but I think it's just part of a progressive movement, I guess.
I mean, one of the funny ideas that we had was to take a house and completely carpet everything in the house, the inside and the outside, and then I kind of lure stray cats in with cat food and just have this giant cat house. I think it's been totally crucial to have these alternative spaces like 809. It's changed our landscape. Now all of a sudden, it's kind of the thing to do. It's the places to show are these spaces.
Last Friday when we opened, I thought, oh, I'm gonna see the same 40 faces that I see all the time. We're gonna have an awkward conversation. We're gonna be like, blah, 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 yeah. Instead, I've seen just thousands of people come through, and these thousands of people are just seeing the gallery for the first time. And unfortunately, it's going to be the last time.
Just the way that we're doing an epilogue for 809, I wanted this story of the house to be something that people could experience. You know, and I think we're a city that we don't have, we do a lot of knocking down, and I think we forget, or we don't always get the opportunity to look at the history of a house or understand how, like, the importance it might have had.
It's just another metamorphosis. I find this incredibly satisfying. After 10 days of craziness, it's kind of nice to end it all off.
I like this idea of a demolition crew coming through and having to look at something that they might see in a gallery or consider artwork and then make the conscious decision to destroy it.
These projects are points of transformation and change, but it remains to be seen how those are reflected in the new reality of it. I don't think it's certainly not purely marketing for the development, although I think that certainly is a byproduct of this work. And so I think I'm still thinking about this and how this relates economically to the development of the area. Was it just a birthday Halloween, as one younger audience member put it, or is there more to it than that? Not that it needs to be.
But I think that the secret answer to that question is that people can get involved by making their own rec cities, by making their own projects like this. This is sort of a dare to people to carry on this project, to do something more, something better, something bigger. Or maybe something less and smaller, but in a similar space that isn't being used for anything else. The end.
Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun. Time to give away to memory. Time to fall away to some story. dun, 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 dun.